So, es lädt.
Alright. Das schaut gut aus. Yep. Very warm welcome or good afternoon. Either way, we have another episode of Peak A's on Air coming up. Sunny 28 degrees, at least in Germany. So slightly warm. I'm quite happy I have my my aircon already, so that works quite well. Next episode, as we already announced, with a very special guest. More on that in a few seconds. Before we get started, very quickly, some housekeeping. As always, hi, I'm Bastian. I'm your host. And with me, again, fully recovered, hopefully,
Yes.
Mrs. Dominique Seppelt, who took a bail last week on me. But you missed a good show. We had quite a lot of fun with Paul, actually, discussing social and paid social.
I've seen it.
You watched at least. Okay,
Yeah.
fair enough. But you're well again, yeah? You all recovered?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm happy to be back in the office, yes.
Yeah, and then we have someone on the show. I think we go back for a couple of years already. It's a long time, small industry, and some people just make an impression, I would say. So without further ado, Kevin Indig, welcome to Peak Ace on Air.
Hello, my fellow Germans.
Yeah, exactly. It's quite a funny story. Kevin, before we get into it, let's do a very, very quick round of introductions, if you will. So what are you doing? Who are you? What do people need to know about you? And what else, maybe? Whatever you want to share.
Of course. First of all, thanks again for having me on. It's a huge pleasure. And yeah, what about me? So I'm VP of SEO and content at G2. We are a B2B software marketplace and in the very competitive software review category. Before that, I was head of SEO at Atlassian, makers of Jira, Trello, and a couple of other tools out there. For those who don't know, I was actually born and raised in Germany, came over to the Silicon Valley about 6 years ago, and I live here in Palo Alto. And I think that's all about me in a nutshell. Maybe I can quickly tease my newsletter. I write this weekly free newsletter called Tech Bound. And I now added a paid tier. So anyway, check this out. Google Tech Bound, you'll find it.
Yeah, you should. You definitely should. I think there's Kevin does a great job of curating the must-read tech SEO stuff. As you all know, I'm a big tech SEO fan, obviously. So that's that's one thing not to miss. I think. I guess, correct me if I'm wrong, Kevin, but I think one of the things is that there's really a lot of good content out there, right? But also original content, but not many people really curate and take the time to read and select. I think that's really cool. So what's the model behind the paid subscription, if we're already with it? So how does it differ from the free one?
Sure. So the free one hasn't changed. I mean, I've been putting this out for almost 2 years now, and the paid subscription is $5 a month.
Right.
For 3 episodes a week.
Okay.
And so it changes. Some of these are essays and statements about what's currently happening in search with Google. Some of those are tactical things that I use in my day-to-day job. Sometimes I have interviews and so on. So it varies.
Okay. So how much time? Let me ask you, how much time do you spend on it then? I mean, that sounds like a lot of work, right?
Yeah, it is. I think per episode, I spend probably 2 to 3 hours.
Yeah.
Sometimes a bit more, sometimes a bit less, depending on what I'm writing about or what the actual format is. But it takes quite a lot of time. But at the same time, it keeps you or it pushes you to stay up to date with things. It pushes you to go out there to read. So I get a lot back from it as well.
Would have been my kind of closing question on that topic. So I assume you read. I mean, guess we all do, right? You read a lot, but so what's your secret sauce on collecting and not forgetting about the resources? How do you organize it? Because I think we all have our own workflows, and I think we are all somewhat as SEOs all about efficiency. So I'm just curious how do you do it?
Yeah. So first of all, I have a very high bar for what I read because I want to spend any minute of my day wisely.
Yeah.
And so if I skim the content and don't see value, then I wouldn't read it in the first place. I usually curate with Feedly. I have a very, very well-groomed feed reader, and I use a tool called Nuzzle that curates my Twitter. And I take notes of everything that I read. So if I read it and I don't take a note, then it means I haven't learned something new from it. And then when I want to curate it for my newsletter, I use Airtable. And then I just, while I'm reading, I take some notes, I copy it over to Airtable, and that's how I curate my feed. And then when I put the email together, I just simply have to copy and paste it over.
Right. Yeah, got it. But it's quite interesting, right? Because I'm living literally in my inbox, so I do it totally different. But it's quite interesting, how to collect and how to manage. Because I think one of the big challenges with the industry in general is that there's just so much stuff out there. And as you said, like, you don't want to waste any. I think we can't, like, no one of us can afford that. Dominique, what's your flow on these things? I mean, how do you organize?
Yeah, actually something in between, I would say. So I'm using Feedly as well for organizing, but the other half is as well in my inbox, I need to say. So organizing everything over there.
Fair enough. One thing that I want to start out, because we have done this in I think in one of the very early episodes, actually, with PKs on Air. We put together, for those of you who recall, like a small kind of curation page, coronafight.net, and I think one of the things that I actually put on there was a piece of content that actually Kevin and I think the team did, where you guys talked a bit about the relative growth, right, of your kind of categories, and then some of the shifts, I would say, or shift of demand probably is the right way to phrase it. Kevin, can you just give us a very quick, before we get into like your topic, because I think we have a really cool thing lined up, but I think it ties in quite nicely. I suppose some of it might, and you can answer it later or now, either way, kind of comes out of that shift, obviously, I would assume as well. Can you quickly summarize like what you guys have seen early on? Because I recall it was an early on post, right? Pretty much at the beginning of this entire Corona craziness. So what did you guys observe, and how did it change for you?
Absolutely. And you're spot on there, Bastian. This whole kind of trend in those observations really inspired this whole deck that I'm about to present, and this whole kind of challenge that I came across with search volume and tools that we use. But what we observed is that towards the end of March, when countries were starting to shut down, the consumer behavior completely changed. Basically, people were looking like crazy for remote software because either there was a company that already had some people working remotely and now needed everybody to work remotely, or there were many companies who never had anybody work remotely, and now the whole staff was working from home however possible. And we observed a couple of interesting trends. Now, one of them, of course, being just that the demand for remote software grew by 5x, 6x in some categories, predominantly remote video conferencing software or video chat software, but also things like telemedicine. And that was very interesting to watch, because I think by now it's clear, but because at the time we realized that some of these trends were accelerated by maybe 5 to 10 years, right? So if you compare that growth that happened within a couple of days in categories like telemedicine to the growth of the previous 5 to 10 years, it was, unfathomable. So tons of explosive growth, and then also stuff like remote whiteboarding and lots of smaller things that you wouldn't expect, but all of a sudden gain a lot of prominence. And these companies, I mean, we have very good relationships with venture capital companies as well, because they use our software to understand software trends. And all of a sudden, like, I think what we'll see over the next coming months is that a lot of these smaller companies will see huge investments because they are so important all of a sudden.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? I mean, the one thing that people would be or were afraid of, I think, in the beginning is also that like, VC money is kind of been or will be frozen and whatnot. But what you're saying is very true, and we've seen it in like the German landscape as well. Like there's a good amount of investments being announced literally on a weekly basis. I mean, of course, it might have slowed down, but as you said, there's just some kind of those rising or hidden stars coming up. That definitely now with this kind of changed environment, if you so will, or like the changed behavior and the changed need of people out there, or like working from home, as you said. I think this is really interesting to watch. So I think the smart play here is obviously maybe to kind of take a step back, like from a VC perspective, and reevaluate what is maybe the kind of traditional business is not anymore, but like some of the other businesses might then still be very, very much relevant. Yeah. So Kevin, do you want to maybe put up the screen share of the slides, and I will then give it over to you, because I think what we should do is like let's have a look of what you guys came up with and what you guys kind of did, and then afterwards we can do a bit of Q&A. I'm sure Dominique and I will have some. We also open it up with Restream, so on all the platforms. So we're on live on Facebook, on Twitter, on Twitch, and on YouTube. So if you guys watching, wherever you're watching, feel free to comment. We're picking up the questions. We will then kind of collect and do that once Kevin is through. I think that makes more sense. And yeah, so with that, I think if you want to share, let's do it.
Yes, sir.
Cool.
Let's jump right in. So just a quick check. I hate this question, but can you see my screen?
Always. Yeah, it works.
I want to make sure.
Oh, good. No, it works.
Good. Because I not too long ago I had a little,
I recall you had a story there, right?
Very uncomfortable story. Very uncomfortable. But I think we're good here. So let's jump in. You were so kind, Bastian and Dominique, to introduce the topic already. But I want to make sure that I narrow it down again to that, problem with search volume. We're going to talk about the trends in just a moment that we're seeing, and some tools they can use instead of search volume or to add on to search volume. But I quickly want to cycle back to this issue with search volume, because there's actually a bigger problem that we've been carrying in the search industry or in the SEO industry. And I've been working on this for like over 10 years now. But we're seeing this continuous challenge with search volume. And first of all, we have to talk about how search volume actually works. And the truth is that nobody 100% knows, right? Like, we have a rough estimation or a rough idea. We assume that search volume means how many people search for a keyword per month, but there's not a lot of Google documentation around that, right? So in some way, we kind of have to take Google's word for this, but it's actually not as clear, when you dig deeper, as we often think. So one of the big problems is that since 2016, Google actually asked for money to get somewhat accurate ranges of search volume. So I'm sure for those who have been around, you remember that very well, when Google all of a sudden only gave you ranges of search volume if you didn't have a paid Google Ads account or AdWords back then. And some of these ranges were between 10 and 100K, so absolutely unuseful. And even if you pay, there are some flaws. So let's actually look at some numbers. This is a screenshot from a Google Ads account with running campaigns. So these search volume ranges are as accurate as it gets in the Google Keyword Planner. And there are a couple of things that I want to point out to kind of highlight the flaws of search volume. First of all, I added 4 keywords here. You can see the monthly search volume down here. And then I compared that with some data from the Google Search Console. So when we compare one of the keywords, CRM software, we see it has 3,600 monthly searches on average in the Keywords Planner. But when you look at reality, a keyword that ranks on the first page on average actually gets over 55,000 impressions. So data is completely off here. And we're going to talk about why in a second. But another example is best CRM software for small businesses, or just best CRM software, has 50 monthly searches in Keyword Planner, and then almost 2,000 impressions in the Google Search Console account. So one of the issues of that is that these are different sources of data, right? We're going to talk about, or I'm going to talk about a bit more about how the Keyword Planner data applies only to Google Ads, right? That's what it was made for. And Search Console takes data writes, it's basically like log files from Google search, right? It takes the data right out of search. So different sources and therefore very different values that we get back here. But monthly search volume is also not that helpful. And I think this crisis, and that's what I alluded to in the beginning, really showed me how problematic it is when those values are updated on a monthly basis and you have that lag, right? So the example that I'm showing here is for the keyword home workout. This screenshot was taken from Google Trends, and it shows how when lockdown came in, how many people all of a sudden searched for home workout, right? And this trend happened within a couple of days, and now is coming back down to baseline. But if you have monthly updated search volume, that will you will not be able to see that trend as quickly. Now, another problem with monthly search volume is that these values that you see here in Keyword Planner, they're all averaged out over the year. So when you compare the average of 3,600 for CRM software, then you'll see that for the month of November, and specifically November 2019, it was actually 4,400 searches, right? Plus, there's actually difference between desktop and mobile search, right? And all of that is not reflected in the classic definition of search volume, especially when we talk about our common rank trackers or rank tracking tools. I already mentioned that search volume is actually a Google AdWords or Google Ads metric. It's not an SEO metric, right? Like this is something that we often forget. So when you look at SERPs like those, like home workouts, the search volume here will be mainly related to the ads, not even Google Shopping, and none of the search results down here, right? Like, which is a video from YouTube. When you look for something like home workout exercises, you'll see that there is no ad above the fold, at least, or at the top of the search results. So search volume here will also not be matching exactly what we see in the search results, and could therefore give you a flawed or wrong picture of reality. Now, another problem is that Keyword Planner actually combines volume for similar keywords. They're clustering and grouping keywords that which could be a big problem, because in reality people might recall or might mean very different things with a keyword that Google clusters as in the group with other keywords that seem related. And then another big issue is that we don't, and before I jump into this, like I don't mean to call any companies out here specifically. This is a problem that every rank tracker deals with, and I added 3 different screenshots of some of the most known tools out there, but nobody's exempt here. And the flaw that I wanted to point out is that it's really tough to capture long tail keyword search volume with Google Keyword Planner. So none of these tools, and again, nobody's exempt here, actually shows any data for a query that has almost 7,000 impressions. So the long tailier it gets, the more difficult it is to actually get good keyword search volume. And then the last problem is that a lot of tools that try to go beyond Keyword Planner mixed clickstream data into their search volume. But as you probably all noticed or followed, Avast shut down one of the biggest sources of clickstream data. And so this data is, it's much harder to get that nowadays, which is a problem for SEOs and for the internet in general, because we rely more and more on Google, which again gives us very, very thin and flawed data. So much about that problem. But of course, I don't want to, only complain. I want to provide some solutions to this as well. So I already talked about Google Trends. I think every SEO or every marketer knows that tool by now. And I think it's also become one of the most important tools for SEOs these days. Now, the problem here is, of course, that the ranges are normalized, but it still helps us to understand what the trends are and how quickly they're developing and how they stand in relation to each other. So one thing that you should do every time that you use Google Trends is to compare it to other trends to get a feeling for the relations. Here in this example, I compared furloughs with layoffs, and you see, for example, that furloughs are spiking much, much harder than layoffs in relationship. You also want to use the maps to make sure that you segment and better understand the trends. So especially in the context of layoffs and furloughs, you see that certain states in the US have been more heavily affected than others. And so whatever you do in marketing, whether it's local SEO or it's Google Ads or just content in general, you want to be aware of those trends and better understand that data. And again, the map feature in Google Trends is a big help with that. I also really liked Hashtagify. This is a non-SEO tool, but can still help us understand some of the big trends. This specifically looks at hashtags from Twitter, Instagram, some of the biggest social platforms. And we should not underestimate those, because if you think about it, search volume is basically a lagging indicator of demand. And some of these social platforms can give us a much, much better or much, much faster understanding of what trends are evolving over time. So Hashtagify comes with a couple of cool metrics. You see stuff like monthly trends, weekly trends. You see related hashtags to the one that you were looking for. You see some influencer in the space, but you can also see trends over time. And I found that to be very neat, because you can understand if this is a growing trend or not, and can then create content or act accordingly. Another really cool one that has started to roll out here in the US and is now also available for Canada and the UK is Pinterest Trends. So Pinterest, I think, is a relatively underestimated or undervalued search engine, but it still has a substantial or significant group of users who are very active. And so Pinterest Trends works very, very similar to Google Trends. It gives you a time range with a normalized scale of search demand over time. But I found that it's very accurate, actually, and very similar to Google Trends. The only kind of issue is, of course, that Pinterest is relatively limited to a certain set of topics. So stuff like health, inspiration, tattoos, and so on are predominant on Pinterest. So you probably won't find good data for every topic out there, but for the ones you do, it's very helpful, because you also get stuff like related trends. So apparently when it comes to home workouts, ab workouts are very popular specifically. So you want to reflect that in your content. But you also get some of the most popular pins, and that's also pretty cool. If I'm a writer and I want to get some inspiration, I can just check some of those pins out, potentially repin them even in my content, and then feed my audience with that. But Pinterest also comes with a pretty cool analytics interface. This is for business accounts, which you can just create without any friction or any problems. And then as soon as you become more active on Pinterest, which you see I'm currently not, you get some really cool data here that can also better help you understand how your audience or people on Pinterest in general interact with your content and specific topics. Now, another tool that I really like is eBay Explore. Also brand new, currently in beta. Mostly, I think they have US data only. They might have data for other English-speaking countries as well. But what you get here are trending products and keywords and their background stories, which is pretty interesting. So you see there's a search interface, so you can try out different, probably e-commerce related keywords. And then you get a couple of things here. So first of all, you get the searches within that time range. And you'll see that time range up here. So this has been trending since February 2018, very popular item on eBay. And you see how many searches this will get you in the 6 weeks leading up to when you are searching for. You'll also get trending keywords, which are related to the one that you look for, and you get an analysis on or some data on how much this item is actually worth. So I find that very interesting, especially in the e-commerce sector. And I also made the comparison with Google Trends here and found that it's in most cases relatively accurate. The cool thing is, though, that you get the number of searches, at least on eBay, so you have an absolute value of demand instead of just a relative one. Exploding topics is a pretty cool tool that I was very happy to see, because it was recently acquired by Brian Dean from Backlinko. I think it was called Trendly before, or Trends with 2 N's. So as the name says here, it will show you exploding topics. So it's geared specifically at trends, and it gives you the option to switch the time range in which these trends are exploding, and to pick from a certain list of categories. But you can also zoom in on these categories, and you can search for keywords yourself as long as they match a particular trend. And then you get all sorts of helpful stuff, like an absolute value for searches per month. Be a little careful with that. I'm relatively confident that this comes from actually a keyword planner, but you also get the gradient and exponent over time, which actually puts this metric a bit more into context, because it tells you how fast this trend is growing, or maybe not. So here, for something like customer relationship management, you'll actually see that in the last 3 months, the trend has been negative. And again, this is super important to understand, because when you only look at a time range like that, you get the impression that this trend is growing by a lot. But when you zoom in a little bit, you'll see that the demand has actually decreased during the COVID times. So this is a tool that I like to stay, that I love to use to stay on top of these trends. And as I mentioned before, it has a pretty neat search function that will help you discover some trends whenever you create content or write content or plan something. Trendly is very similar to exploding trends or exploding topics. It will also give you a search terminal and show you some of the most recently trending trends out there, but it also provides you the rising keywords or queries on different platforms. And that's pretty cool, especially when you're present on Amazon as well, or when you create YouTube content. You get those as well, and you can quickly jump on the trend, create some content for it. Another similar one is Glimpse. Glimpse is also compared to Trendly and Exploding Topics, but does not have a search feature. It does, however, point out some companies that are trending, some products and some industries. So it's still pretty helpful. And it sends out a pretty cool newsletter with trends and their explanations. And I found that very exciting, especially when you have a relatively broad range of topics that you're covering. For example, when you're a publisher, I think this is excellent to maybe jump on some very fast spreading trends, or maybe even to Newsjack. And you get some of the background explained in the email here as well. So definitely subscribe to that. I think you get 2 monthly newsletters for free, and then when you pay a little bit of money, you get much more recent stuff. Of course, I want to call out Right here, my German colleagues, real quick. And you can basically use this approach with almost every rank tracker there. But one thing that's really cool with Right is that they provide a lot of data from Google Search Console. And so in their search success feature, they have a report that's called Changes. And when you use that Changes report with the filter in which you set the position to 0, then what you will get is a list of keywords that have not changed their ranking position, but have increased in impressions. And that could help you. Don't look at the data here. That's just from my personal site. So you'll find much, much better data in your own personal Search Console account. But when you normalize for the ranking change over time, you get, again, the impression trend, which can help you understand if there's an increasing search demand for a topic or not. And that might help you to understand the search trends on your own site, or for keywords that your site is ranking for. You can also do that on a page level, of course. Here in Right, it's under search success, changes. You do the same thing where you set the position trends to equal 0. And then you get a list of pages that are stable in the ranking position but gain impressions. Again, the stable ranking position is important because otherwise it could be that you just rank higher and therefore get more impressions. But when you isolate that variable, then you can understand search trends as they relate to your important keywords much, much better. And then Right also has a alerts feature, which can make you aware of that as well. The last one that I want to call out is called Inlinks. That's the new tool from Dixon Jones. It's very interesting because it does a couple of things. So first of all, it also has a page for growing, stable, and falling trends. Most of that data is freely accessible, and it looks like that. Where, for example, for the category of marketing, you can see some of those growing, stable, and falling trends. So that can help inform your content strategy. And when you click on one of those, the interesting part is that, similar to other tools, you get the trends over time, of course, but you also get questions about that specific topic. And I found that to be very neat, especially when you create a topic. We know that questions are, gaining an importance since Google rolled out support for stuff like FAQ schema or Q&A schema. And that tool can help you discover that even without a paid account. But you can take it a step further. There is a little button up here on the right where you can actually create content for these trends, and you get a fully fledged content report, including all the most important entities and how often the top ranking results are covering those in their data. So it's more of an end-to-end solution. So to finish up, what are we going to do with all this data? Of course, we're going to create tons of content, specifically when it comes to concerns and expectations during this time of crisis. I found that to be very relevant. But it can also help you to rethink your business model, right? I think we're lucky to work in the software industry, but when you work in the travel software industry, for example, or the car rental space, it's a very tough time. And hopefully some of these trends or emerging trends can help you find a different angle, or at least refocus on certain product categories that yield higher returns than others right now. I also found this to be super helpful when you want to newsjack, meaning when you want to be part of a conversation, that is quickly emerging and that's pretty hot right now. So that those tools will help you understand the trends and the sub-trends that might help you find a unique angle if you want to go for just attention or PR and backlinks. And that's pretty much it from my side. So yeah, thanks a ton for tuning in, paying attention, and thanks to PKs for allowing me to present here.
I guess the truth is we should be very thankful for you having the time. So yeah, really, really cool. Thank you very much. Much appreciate that. Yeah, there's a lot of things you can do right now, right? I mean, that was just a whole bunch of ways and tools, and I think there's a lot of new stuff in there as well, which is I think really cool. I guess you could probably say that sometimes those, like, I would say, special circumstances actually even reveal, let's say, flaws and weaknesses of existing stuff, right? And you kind of start poking around trying to figure out what how to fix it and what can help, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's kind of the bottom line of this whole presentation is that like we need to be good marketers who understand the tone of the time, or the zeitgeist, to use the German word here. And I think that, again, like that's the whole kind of context and background. Like search volume is not a good metric to react to that and to be present. So especially if you want to create content, which is so important in the SEO space, or if you're super technical and you work for a marketplace, and you have much more of like an inventory driven site, then those trends help you as well to understand what works well, and you don't have to wait for your conversion report to understand what is currently going well and whatnot, right?
Yeah, because that's, as you said correctly, is also lagging. I mean, not as severe as as search volume is per se, but nevertheless, that still takes a bit of time, right? So we have a couple of comments, and I guess we also kind of go through a couple of questions. But one thing that I think Oliver or Olivier, either way, sorry, I'm not sure what's the right pronunciation, but hey, mentioned is that also he found YouTube Analytics quite useful, as well as the Google My Business Insights section. Have you had a chance to play with those? Any thoughts on those two?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's some interesting stuff out there in the Google Merchant Center as well, and related market finder trends. That's pretty cool, especially in the e-commerce space. And then YouTube Analytics, I'm a huge fan of that. And I've tried for, I think, a couple of years now to better connect YouTube Analytics data to some other analytics like Search Console and Google Analytics, which is not that easy. But what I find so interesting about YouTube Analytics is that you can very exactly tie the attention to something that is visible in the video. So, if you're smart about it, you can really understand what resonates with your audience and what not. And I think they're also getting better at allowing you to export some of the data into Data Studio. So I'm really excited to see who comes out first with like a smart kind of Data Studio dashboard that allows you to tie some YouTube trends to some of your other content trends, especially when you embed YouTube videos in your actual content. That's actually something that we did at Atlassian, which was very content heavy. And there we found out after like lots of analysis that our software tutorial videos were actually a substantial part when it came to evaluating our software.
Right.
So then we went out and created much more YouTube content. We embedded that, or videos, and we embedded those in our actually like written content in our documentation. And that is very interesting if you can tie the analytics back to that embed.
Because you can like start combining it, right?
Exactly.
How did you do it technically? You just like did a YouTube embed, or did you do any other magic to it, or it was just like embedding it from YouTube?
YouTube embed, and then you can also use Google Tag Manager to create an event and then see when people actually interact with it.
Okay, makes sense. Yeah. You touched on another interesting topic that I kind of wanted to poke around a bit and probably also discuss. Like, I mean, one of the things that I think when it comes down to scalability, really, is obviously we all, and probably also goes back to what we had earlier. Like, I mean, no one has time these days, and like everyone wants things done fast. Did you have a chance to kind of take it a step further? I would probably say, and like either play with, like, I mean, I'm sure not everyone is offering APIs these days, but I mean, then potentially scraping or whatnot. So any thoughts on automation that you had around it, or like tying things together? Is there anything you can share?
Yeah, absolutely. So actually, I mentioned some of the tools like Exploding Topics, Glimpse, and Trendly. And I reached out to them, some of those, and they all have endpoints or an API that they can offer you to make very simple calls and integrate into your Google Sheets and then create a dashboard out of it. And that's actually what we used to enrich some of our search volume data. And usually those are not coming at a heavy cost. But one of the biggest issues that you have to solve out there is that Google Trends doesn't have a direct API. So you have to scrape it in like some way, or there are ways to get around it. But yeah, most of these tool providers actually provide an API. You just have to reach out to them, and they're very open and friendly to discuss such a deal. And I think that's kind of where the direction is going on, until someone integrates it in their tools as well. Honestly, one of the reasons, I poke at some tool vendors out there. Like, I'm friendly with all of them. I have good relationships with all of them, and not meaning to call anyone out. But I'm also poking them a little bit and pushing them a little bit, because I think those are very necessary things that I want them to integrate. So I wouldn't be surprised if the most common rank tracking tools pretty soon offer Google Trends as well. I know some of them have a slightly similar metric. But if a kind of new tool out there can quickly put together Google Trends, YouTube Analytics, Amazon Analytics, I think some of the bigger tool vendors can as well, and I think they really should.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I think an aggregated view is absolutely needed, because again, like, if you want to scale it and make it like a kind of a standard for like your reporting and whatnot, I think that you can't like waste time, poke around left, right, and center, as you said, and then just trying to collect the stuff manually. I mean, that doesn't really fly. By the way, what's your favorite solution in terms of like dashboarding and aggregating? Is there anything you're relying on? Is it Data Studio? Or is it something else, Tableau, or what's your favorite?
It's mixed. So we used Tableau at Atlassian, and to be honest, I thought it was good, but it's not my favorite, because it can be a pain to be set up. I love Data Studio because it's quick and flexible, and it sometimes misses things as well. So I think Looker is a great alternative to Data Studio. But especially when it comes, like, very often what I actually do is I just sketch out databases and dashboards with like a simple Google Sheets and Data Studio combination, because I just want to see, like, can I get there? Does it work?
And it's quick, right? As you said.
Yeah, it's quick and effective. And then I can think about, how do I join these tables in BigQuery, and how do we make this, like, how do we cache those tables, and how do we make it a bit more reusable and scalable? But first, I want to see, does it work at small scale, and like a quick Sheets is enough.
Dominique, I mean, you guys are using a lot of the, like, obviously a lot of content campaigns you guys are building are somewhat centered around, and I think Kevin mentioned that, like, in sometime in between, said, well, yeah, I mean, obviously news checking is one of the strategies that oftentimes is part of a larger, or like part of a strategy, part of a larger play, so to say. Is there any like additions on tools, or have you had the chance to play with some of the ones mentioned? What are your takes?
Yeah, so first of all, I found some tools super interesting because for example, the Pinterest Insights or Pinterest Trends is super relevant, and I cannot wait to have it in Germany as well.
It's quite funny that you say it. Paul, like our guy who runs paid social, also commented on that. So like everyone is now hooked up onto the Pinterest. Pinterest tool. So that's good. Well done.
Yeah, I can imagine as well for the beauty sector, right? So this would be super helpful. And I would say, especially when it comes to news jacking as a strategy or as a tactic, I would add something like a tweet deck over here, maybe, because this is something we use in our team as well in many cases. So collecting your kind of columns and what kind of channels or hashtags you are following, it's super easy to develop or to find any kind of trends in a very fast way, let's say, because I think this is the most important thing when it's about news checking, right? So and therefore Pinterest would be relevant here as well.
Pinterest would be good. Okay, got it. Take noted. I think one of the things though that's also interesting, Kevin, I'm not sure what your take on this is, but like you mentioned already with eBay, for example. I mean, I guess the one thing that we all need to be aware of, though, because is kind of the nature of the platform where it stems from, right? So Dominique just said it pretty much correctly. I would say for like beauty, that certainly works on Pinterest. I don't know, fintech, maybe less so. On the other hand, if we're looking at eBay, of course, as you said very much correctly, that's very deep on all commercial queries that can help me probably to enrich my commercial content or like that content for commercial pages, but probably not so much for some of the more, I don't know, educational whatever. So I think one of the challenges is that also, and that's a different topic, not really connected to what you were presenting, but like maybe you have a take on that as well. So we have been playing a lot with kind of the sentiment, and not only sentiment, but also like topical clustering and trying to understand like on a broader, but also on a more granular level, what's the query, what's the intent behind the query, and then also kind of like, is it more into e-com? Is it more information? I mean, I think we all agree that it's not always very clear, and I suppose that's the same for you guys. But what's your take on that? Is there any magic you guys are doing that you can share, or anything that you have been playing with?
Yeah, for sure. I'm actually writing a blog article about this.
Right. See, there we go.
Published, and it's about fragmented user intent, which I think is a topic that we're not talking about enough in SEO. And to give a little preview, so the whole idea or this kind of model that I've built is the idea of reverse engineering fragmented user intent based on SERP features. So SERP features like knowledge cards, image packs, local packs, all this kind of stuff. Like there's a whole range of them. I think are a great indicator for Google's understanding of the search intent. And even further, I mean, it's like a long-winded article, so I'm trying to summarize that. But we also have to, especially when it comes to short-head keywords, distinguish between dominant, common, and minor search intent, which is a differentiation that Google makes as well. And so anyway, like I came up with this whole model that you can use to look at SERP features to understand what those dominant, common, and minor search intents are for a short-head keyword that has a fragmented user intent, and that will help you better understand how high your chances are to actually get traffic from such a keyword and rank for it highly. But I think another problem that we're not talking about often enough is that these short-head keywords are tougher and tougher for SEOs because they are so ambiguous, because it's so unclear what people actually want to get out of them. And I think that these trends are a good indicator for what has a high search demand, but then we as SEOs need to add another layer of critical thinking and saying, does this actually make sense or does it not? However, I also think there's a little window of opportunity for some of these emerging trends, because most of the time Google needs some time to understand what the perfect search intent is for that keyword.
Exactly.
So if you're fast and if you can create content quickly for it, you can I think rank well before Google comes with all their SERP features and takes all the traffic away.
That's a very interesting it's a very interesting concept there. I guess what also people don't understand often enough, I would say, is then there's also things like potentially QDD in play. So when the query somewhat deserves diversity, where Google is, even after like a certain amount of time, not really sure. So I think I totally like and we have been doing that also quite a lot for just trying to use this SERP per se as a basis for trying to understand what is the intent. However, though, that still means that Google needs to get it right. That's the other side of the story, right? I've seen so many when you looked at the search results and you're like, so why, right? And then when you go back, so I kind of, for an experiment I was running, I kind of bookmarked some of those and then I revisited, had a script revisit them on a certain frequency and trying to understand when they are shifting it out. So there's for some of those, there's a really interesting, let's say, volatility where they're testing this preview and that preview, and then you have a featured snippet and all of a sudden it's all gone. It looks again all different. So I think it's a huge challenge that companies also need to kind of somewhat tackle, because as you said, it can be very different based on persona, I would say, so minor, major, but also it changes over time.
It absolutely does.
Somewhat it's an exercise that you need to redo, right?
Yeah, a perfect example right now is one of my favorites is Independence Day, right? Yeah. Most of the year you have the relation to the movie, and now soon July 4th is coming up, so it will be the holiday. And you can see the search results changing every year according to that time. I know people in the e-commerce space know that very well. When it gets closer to Christmas or Black Friday or that kind of stuff is another common one. And then interestingly, Google starts to indicate that more and more with these so-called query refinement bubbles. So you see those on mobile, where Google actually asks the user, hey, what do you really want to see? And I have the very strong assumption that Google uses that as well to then change the search results if they see that it pivots from one to the other. So that's a huge strategy. And again, this is something that we could, with SEO tools, track and better understand. I think this is information that is missing for SEOs right now at scale. So not to give too much heat to tool vendors, but I'm just saying there is a big opportunity, and I think that
clearly is. And I would imagine some really, as you said, I mean, we are kind of really friendly with all of them, because we are kind of using, similar to you guys, probably a broad variety depending on the job, and also sometimes for us at least on the client's preference, obviously. But yeah, I think there is some work to be done, which I guess was kind of for some a bit more. I think some got a bit more, let's say, caught in the surprise with the Avast story that you obviously mentioned, rightfully so. And I think for some others, when they more rely on official sources, just this and that, then that's probably fine. But then it might be off because, as you pointed out, some of those sources are not really the most reliable ones in the world. So I have 2 or 3 more questions that came up. So one question was around the fact you mentioned Google Trends. I think we also are huge fans. Have you noticed? You had mainly US examples there. Have you noticed any I would say quality of a difference in quality in terms of looking at that from a US/English language perspective, because you also obviously speak fluently German. So have you noticed anything that's does it work globally, or would you say, well, maybe it's more on the US side of things? What's your take on that?
It is a good question, because my story is that it works well for Western countries that are very accustomed to search, especially Google search. I don't speak Chinese or Cantonese well enough, or languages that are spoken in India or maybe even South America to really understand how good the quality is. So I think that's a perspective that I'm missing, but I could totally see that the quality there is not as good. But I found that for most purposes, and most companies target Western markets anyway.
Absolutely.
But yeah, that's something that I'd be very interested to hear from an expert or from a local, actually.
Yeah, so if anyone has a thought on that and is more familiar with Chinese or the Indian market, for example, feel free to let us know, give us a shout. Would be quite interesting, because I would agree on the Google takes. If you have Google heavy let's say, languages and markets, then that seems to be a fairly accurate representation of what's going on. However, like on markets also such as Russia, where like Yandex is obviously very strong, or we have Seznam and Naver and others. There's potentially it's not the full picture. It's a bit similar, right? A bit similar to like an eBay, mainly being obviously heavy and pretty accurate, I suppose, on e-com. Same kind of the same story.
Yeah, totally.
Another,
one perspective that I quickly want to add is that it might be very interesting to look at Bing trends, because they power the English search of Baidu.
True.
So you could maybe get some hints for Chinese there. But yeah, anyway, just wanted to throw that in.
No, good point. Yeah, I mean that's one of the things that I think that's a great perspective you guys have a bit more in the US, to be honest, and we're lagging a bit in Europe. And I like the guys. I like, I'm friends with a lot of like Microsoft Bing kind of people, and they're great folks, but like sadly I would say it's still lagging visibility in the European markets, as sad as it is.
Yeah, it does. I think they're making some good strides.
They do.
I haven't checked it out yet, but I think the Bing Web Master Tools now also provides a
revamped
research feature.
Yeah.
So it's getting interesting. They're definitely pushing heavy on that front, and I think the better they side with SEOs, or the more value they provide to SEOs, the more market share they might eventually gain.
Yeah, I think it's actually a very smart play, a smart strategy to take on that route. I agree.
Yeah.
Another question that we had, maybe you can quickly elaborate a bit more on. So it was around the like up-to-date metrics versus like the lagging metrics situation. I mean, can you just quickly summarize again, like what in your definition are lagging metrics, and why is that a problem versus why is it so important to understand I know it's somewhat redundant, but like the question came up again. So like why is it so important to have like the up-to-date ones versus only lagging metrics?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we speak about search volume specifically, it is important so they can quickly pivot your business model, your content strategy, create content for emerging topics, and also understand the consumer behavior changes, right? I think COVID is a perfect example. Just in general, it is very, very important to distinguish between input, quality, and output metrics. So let me give an example. An output metric would be backlinks, right? Measuring backlinks, looking at backlinks is cool, but if you really want to understand how to drive that number, you need to look at an input metric like outreach emails, for examples, right? Could be guest posts as well. And then a quality metric would be an open rate of these outreach emails, or how many guest posts are accepted, for example. And that will help you to better understand if you're actually efficiently driving backlinks or not, right? Otherwise, you have this whole kind of journey or you shoot in the dark pretty much, right? So with search volume, I think it's very, very similar, where if you understand demand as it quickly rises, topics emerge, and as they come up, if you understand it fast enough, you can be one of the first ones out there with content. You can create relevant stuff for your target audience, be on the pulse of time. There are all these kind of benefits that I see from being quick and snappy when it comes to emerging trends. And again, like these tools that I introduced and presented, I think are key here to evaluate from several perspectives. Right, there's the social perspective, which I think is like a better way to monitor input for such a demand than even the search volume, which is very lagging because of it's delayed and takes time to aggregate that. So when you see hashtag trending, for example, I think that's a great input metric to understand, is there slowly an emerging trend coming up or not?
Yeah, and it's as you said, like it's very, obviously very user centric as well, right? It can be kind of based on demographics. Even I think we saw that Dominic and I had in an early episode. We discussed this situation around the Adidas boycott, where they didn't want to pay the rents, and obviously that was or they said and then apologized and whatnot. Long story, but like where that was obviously there was a major outcry in Germany, but it was not really relevant somewhere else, right? So that those hashtags you could only see on the kind of the Germanish in the Germanish sphere, which I think is also a great indicator to understand, does it have a relevance? I mean, we work oftentimes in multilingual setups. So does it work what we are planning to do only in one market? Is it relevant for other markets as well? So how can you like scale it, or is it even worth scaling, or is it maybe just an idea that needs to be run locally, right?
Absolutely. And then you see that trending on Google Trends, for example, say the keyword Adidas all of a sudden gets more searches, but then you need a social perspective to get the context, right? It's not a positive context.
Exactly. It's the sentiment there as well. Yeah, I agree. Sentiment. I agree. Yeah. Dominique, do you have anything else on your questions list? We already it's crazy how time flies, right? 2 minutes to 5. Absolutely insane.
Yeah, maybe one last question. So I'm still thinking about the part of content localization and scaling content, and we already touched on it a bit. And I would like to ask Kevin, do you have any what kind of tools, I mean, you presented some of those, you would recommend to get a better and fast understanding of markets? Because of course we also work a lot with content localization for several markets, mainly in Europe, and we have native speakers for those specific markets as well, which is good to get a general understanding out of the market, but not in terms of trending topics, right? So maybe you have something you would like to recommend over there, how to scale the content and get fast understanding.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I think native speakers and locals are actually key. I learned that when I scaled the content strategy globally at Atlassian. There is no way around that. Whatever machine learning tool you want to use, it just can't keep up with that. And then I think the democratization of data is the most important aspect here. So however you are set up, whether you have like a strong headquarter in one country and then have like a couple of satellites in other countries, or whether you have a more decentralized marketing department, I think the key is to have that data set up, to use several tools, to have constant like alerts or pings, or like look at the dashboards on a daily basis at least, and then to give people in those local markets the freedom to quickly create content. But I think I have less of a tool that I can recommend and much more a process, which is that the more friction you introduce, it's a workflow issue. The more friction you introduce and the longer it takes, the more approvals people need to create content, the worse off you'll be. So hire the right people, train them on how to use that data, democratize that data, and make sure that they have the freedom to get that content out there quickly.
Yeah. Okay, great. I mean, it also maybe depends on what kind of goals you have with those kind of specific content you want to localize, right? I mean, this is something, I mean, when it's about building backlinks, for example, I mean, it's not the same landscape in every market. So I think this is also something, which should be taken into account as well.
I guess that's true, right? I mean, if you have just like help center-ish type of content, that's probably a different story to localize, rather than bringing in like a full kind of flavored keyword research and restructuring process, because obviously you have synonyms and all of those funny things that are very much depending on the market. Yeah, true.
Oh yeah, totally.
Fantastic. 5 on the dot. I feel we can probably chat on for ages, but I guess we need to call it. Tuesday. Almost said. Kevin, thank you very, very, very much. Highly appreciate you took the time to join us for a chat. Again, a huge shout out to Kevin's newsletter. Don't miss it. Go there. Subscribe, be well informed on all things tech SEO. Kevin, are you sharing the slides? Are the slides somewhere online? Can people email you? What's the best way for getting the slides?
Yes, I'll definitely share them.
Cool.
I'll load them up so you can check them out.
Fantastic. So we're gonna add them to the show notes, guys. If you want to follow up, there's a whole bunch of you've seen it probably on the right hand corner. There's always like the links to the tools. So if you're gonna play with it, I think that's worth checking as well. We will be back next week with another episode. Dominique, help me out. Are we back on Monday or are we back on Tuesday? I think we're back on Monday to the old schedule because there is no national holiday on Monday. So on Monday, 4 p.m. German time, and another episode of PKs on Air. And with that, I guess we are signing out. Kevin, thanks again so much for your time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I speak to you very soon.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on. Thanks for the questions and everybody tuning in. It was a pleasure.
Thanks.
Great. Bye.
Bye-bye.